Hey folks, it is good to be back. I've been out on vacation for 3 weeks. Absolutely wonderful. Something that everybody should definitely go do if you are a working professional. Even if you're not a working professional, just vacation and getting time out is a wonderful thing. So we're gonna get into it for today. Just broadcast what kind of stuff have we encountered through the week. And I was talking with one of my colleagues, and they had a really interesting question about how I handle a particular scenario. And the question was, what do you do when you get into a situation where the information you are sharing conflicts with the information or ideas being shared by others? For example, let's say that you design something and a issue comes up. It could be an issue raised by the customer, or it could be an issue raised by a colleague or another team or whatever. And they say that what you have shared is absolute garbage and just is like an anti-pattern or the worst thing ever, etc. So um, this has definitely happened to me at least more than once. Um, and, as time goes on, it still happens, but, as you gain more and more experience, it tends to be one, you just don't get into that situation anymore. And it's not necessarily a result of that you are better at designing. Obviously, as time goes on, you get better at building and designing. But it's also like the way that you communicate tends to change. So to try to address this question, I want to start with like the first and best thing is to just not get in that situation at all to begin with. And we're going to start with that, and then we'll start with like how do you not get into that situation, and then we'll move into the okay, you've done things to not get into that situation, and now you're in that situation anyways. So one, how do I stay out of that situation? Because like that, you just don't want to be there to begin with. And let's operate under the assumption that you're working with a customer and you have an idea and it's a bad idea. Let's just operate under that. The first thing is that when I communicate with customers, um, I'm I never say that this is the best way, the only way, the ultimate way. You need to do it this way. You should do it that way, right? Those are um, very big committal kind of things, and oftentimes there's a lot going on around what you're doing and what you're working on that you may not necessarily be aware of, and using and saying those types of things um, are going to lead you into trouble. So what I tend to do instead is you can do this, you could do this, it has been done like this before. Um, and especially in software, like there's 1,000 ways to do something, and all 1,000 ways can technically work. And the thing is, like, at least if you're an advisor for a customer, if you're the customer yourself, you need to be making those decisions for yourself. So I want to be clear that, like, this is from like an advisor consultant type of perspective. If you're advising somebody on these things, like, you aren't 100% aware necessarily of how big is their development team, how many other teams are there. You've been introduced to these people, but what about those people over there? So like, a project, somebody could come in and want to use all the drag and drop tools, and you're going to look at that as a software engineer and be like, dude, drag and drop tools are like the bane of all engineering existence, except if it's like a one person show, you have no other security teams, and you need to be able to operate and update and fix and maintain quickly and oftentimes directly in production. So like these types of considerations, there's all these other considerations that come out, and if you spend enough time with a particular customer or a particular account, you'll become more and more familiar with those as you get more information around the entire context of the solution, the organization, the business for the particular thing that you're advising on. It's not always 100% technology. And you know, I encountered another one it was this week actually, and the software that they were working on had been developed initially in 2017, so 5 years ago. So we're coming up on time to start thinking about modernizing it. It was running really slow. They had added some capabilities to it that pushed the compute requirements over the edge a bit. And we're looking at this, and I'm seeing that it's very typical with the company that I work for, where you'll encounter a lot of documentation and best practices that are well documented, and obviously people follow those, and that may not necessarily be the best solution for them. And this is one of those scenarios where like what was documented is good probably for 90% of the scenarios out there, but this customer just wasn't one of those 90%. They were the other 10%. So they followed it. And that's fine. They needed to get up and running, and they ran a successful business for 5 years doing this. So it's not like it was a bad idea. It was a great idea at the time. They got a product out the door, and it worked. And it was valuable, and they improved the systems, they dropped the cost. It's everything that you want out of a software product. But it comes time to modernize. But we're 5 years later. So, I mean, you definitely got a positive ROI on that investment. So then when you look at it, you can't just go in there and say, hey, that's a shit idea. Oh, shoot, language, it's live broadcast. That's a bad idea, right? Like, why would you ever build it like that? You can't, like, they got value out of that thing, man. Like that, you gotta chill out. So what we do is we take a look at how can we progress it forward and lay out a bunch of options. So they already had a base of stuff that was there, and we already know up front that we're going to have to likely design against the quote unquote best practices and best way to do things. And what we end up doing so that we avoid, because going back to the original question of how do you avoid people saying that your idea is garbage or conflict with that, like, and now you're going to have to either say that about the previous idea and put out a new idea where somebody's going to say that later on in the future, is lay out what the options are for them, right? So I think we laid out five. I'm pretty sure we did 5 options for this particular scenario of ways that it could be done, and went through lining out what are all the benefits of each scenario, what are all the cons of each solution. I mean, we even did the bad ones. Like I knew going in, I was like, this is going to be a bad idea, but like, let's just, it's a solution. It fits within your skill sets. It fits within your business scenario, but I know compared to the other 3 or 4 ideas, this is going to be kind of on the lower end. But you know what? You don't really know. I did a customer before, and like I laid out one of those options where I was like, this is a garbage idea for them. And you know what? They clung on to it. And it ended up being a really good solution for them. And it was because of one of those things that you aren't necessarily aware of. For that customer, they had a large services delivery team who did not know how to write software. And drag and drop tools, typically in a customer whose main business is developing and delivering software, is not a very popular choice when stood up against other tools where the main focus is the code, and you have a very like standardized concrete way to deliver software, but they didn't have that for the way that they actually sold and delivered their software to their customers. They had an army of basically technical specialists who knew how to work drag and drop tools and integrate different things. So a lot of like lower on the technical spectrum systems integrators. So long story short, the way that you try to do this is you show them options of things that they could do. You lay out as many pros and cons. You make sure that the customer feels involved in the decisions and the designs that are being made. It's not your job to design it most of the time. It's your job to advise them as to what things they could be building and could be designing that will be conducive for them and helping them understand the options and the impacts of those options and trying to work through that with them so that ultimately they become the stakeholders of their own future, because you don't necessarily, like if you have a customer, right, you do not work for the customer. You're hired by the customer to help them with something, and ultimately that something is something that they own, not you. You're just helping them with building it so that they can own it. So it's nice for them to be able to have some sense of ownership in the design and building process. And then when it comes time to, we're going to go to the second side of this problem of this question was, when something bad, okay, we did a bad design, right? We're just pretend we did a bad design. And you worked with the customer, they bought into it, they loved it, they built it, and like a year later, it's failing for some reason. Whatever that reason is, because you had the conversations of laying out the pros, the cons, working with them on that, trying to do as thorough of a review as possible, sharing every piece of work and research that went into those decisions and pros and cons. When that comes up, what we find is that often those issues come up as a result of unforeseen circumstances. So a good example would be a product that becomes significantly more useful and sells a lot more business than what you had anticipated. So so actually this is a really good one, because oftentimes when designing things, you make specific considerations for scale. Often when you design for smaller scale, it's simpler, faster, easier time to market. So if you help them make something and you have you could have two scale options. You could have one where, hey, we're going to do this. It's the simplest, fastest time to market, easiest to go do, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. The problem is that if we exceed the specifications for the design that we came up with, then you're going to be in trouble later down the road. So they could pick that one, right? But you should have also, hopefully, ideally, laid out some options for, okay, this is going to be more complicated to build. It's going to be slower time to market. But should you become one of these like viral solutions, like an Uber or something like that, right? Like you have a method to easily and quickly grow. So what I'm saying here is that when you get these issues, a lot of the times they come as unforeseen circumstances. Or I've also seen it come in where they're just like code flaws. Like we had one where it was just a straight up memory leak. Like that was it. It was they were just storing information, and at the initial scale levels, it wasn't a problem. Or another one was, and this was actually a good one because it was a full out miss on our side, was that there was a particular limit in one of the pieces of infrastructure that we were using. and we were able to resolve a lot of this pretty quickly before it became a real problem. But luckily, we had some monitoring systems in place, so we resolved it before it became a problem. But it started to look like it's about to become a problem. I'm using non-specific verbiage because these are real customers and real scenarios. Um, but we caught it before it became a problem, and we started to address it at that point. So that actually got escalated to a team who said, "Whoa, guys, why did you do that? That's an awful idea." And this goes back again to the original question of how do you handle it when it's your fault, your design, you really did it. I really did this one. And we looked at it and I went, yeah, I missed it, man. Like, we went through all this, we did all this effort, and like, here's all the research that we did, and that particular item that we should have covered, we didn't cover it. And you just gotta suck it up and own it, and then work with them to resolve it. And you know what happens? Like, people think that, oh, if you accept the blame, that they're not gonna believe in you or trust you anymore. Like, how are you gonna sell more projects? Like, you obviously did a bad job. No, they trust you more. It's the exact opposite effect, because when something goes wrong, what happened? You stepped up and took it and just said, yes, that was my fault. Here's what I'm going to do to fix it. That is a big differentiator. If there is something that lands on like your design or your problem, and you try to pass the buck off, man, they're not dumb. Like, people are smart. Like, they can see what you're doing, and you're no longer going to have the level of trust that you had with them. Step up, own the problem, fix the problem. It'll be a minor blip in the relationship versus if you try to come up with a bunch of excuses and reasons and stuff like that. So, um, yeah, that was that was the question, and I'm still not a popular YouTuber, so I got no questions on live chat or whatever. I also started like 10 minutes early, so anyways, I feel like that's good content for today, and we look forward to having another session on next Friday. And